Welcome back to ADHD Power Tools. We have Jeff Copper with us again. And today I want to talk about Task Darwinism. Jeff, you've brought it up before and on your YouTube channel. And I want to ask you, how does it play a role with prioritizing tasks, and what is Task Darwinism?
So I think we've all had that experience. Maybe you go to your computer and you have something that you need to get done that's important, but you find yourself doing a whole bunch of other things. The question is, well, why? I mean, if it's important, I mean, we can sit there and say about the future, about what's going to do for me and all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is, behaviorally, we're not doing it. So I'm the type of person, you got to define stuff and you got to understand it. So prioritization is assigning importance to a task. It's really all it is. You're identifying this is important. Assigning importance is nice, but if you're going to execute it, there's certain things that have to come together in order for that to happen. And this is the part where people with ADHD skip over the thinking part. They assign importance to it, and they get over, they don't plan. I'll come back to the thinking part, but in order to do anything that's important, there's a couple elements that have to come together in order to happen. Number one, you've got to be in a conducive location. If a task requires you to have a computer and you're not in the presence of one, you're not going to do it. Or maybe you're in a location, but you have a cell phone and it's the wrong tool. The bottom line is you have to be in the right location. Number two, you have to have sufficient time. This is a big one for people with ADHD because when you have a methodical task that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, it's easy, but lots of people don't realize that sometimes problem solving is a trial and error process. And by definition, if it's trial and error, it's difficult to determine the amount of time that's necessary to do that. So often people are trying to do a task at a time where they have other things going on and they really kind of can't get into it. So far, you got to be in a conducive location. You got to have the time, and you also have to have needed resources. Like if you were to sit down and do your taxes, but you were missing a 1099 or a W-2, you don't have what you need in that moment to do it. You also need tools. But the most important thing when it comes to doing something that's important is you have to have clarity on what you're doing, okay? So all of those elements have to come together at one time in order for you to execute whatever it is you think is important. And if any of those elements are gone, what I find is Task Darwin that's the natural selection of the process that you will do in that moment, what you can do, because all those things are present. So if let's say you have to write an article or something or a blog, and you're not really clear on what you want to say, and you haven't flushed your way through that, but you've got a lot of other emails, oh yeah, I can do this, you'll find yourself doing all those unimportant things in a sense, because you can do them, you have the clarity, you're at the right location, you're doing that, and you're reducing the pressure. At least I'm getting something done, whereas I'm just staring off into the distance, not doing anything about, like, I really don't know what to write. It happens. So I call it Task Darwinism. If you look at the raw behavior, it's actually kind of productive that you're doing some of those other things. But the issue, what I really want to emphasize, is just because you have a task that you've assigned importance and you schedule time on Thursday doesn't mean you're going to do it. Most of the time you'll find you're off doing something else. And you and I, we talked about this in another interview about the importance of clarity, because if you don't have you're not really sure what to do, or you don't have resources to find it, it would be unproductive for you to sit there and stare into space. So it's legitimate that you don't do it. But the nugget here that's important is people with ADHD, if you're going to assign importance, you have to stop and think about all those factors, clarity being one of them, and you have to bring it all together. Now, I will say that I don't coach people on Friday. That's my day for my really important stuff. And one of the things for me is I have to do a lot of creative type stuff. And to get clarity, sometimes I've got to talk out loud with somebody. And whenever I have something like that, I make sure that I have people that I know, whether it's my brother or my mother or a friend or something like that. I'll tell them this is a creativity day, and you're likely going to get a phone call from me at some point in time to talk out loud or get your perspective. Know is that I've scheduled the day where I don't have the distractions. I'm going to make sure I have everything in that one location. Clarity, I know, is a big part. That's why I'm going to line up people that I can go process that through. And I'm often able to get some things, but it requires me to stop and think about those elements and plan for them in order to get it done. So in summary, if you're going to assign importance, you actually have to look at the elements. Most people don't. They find themselves doing something else because that's task Darwin. It's the natural selection that takes place of the items that you can do there. Now, of course, there's one caveat to that, and that's the cell phone, where you're off on social media and just escaping everything because it just feels good and you don't want to do the pain of everything else. And now you're shaming yourself that you didn't do it. The root cause of this is you didn't think through those elements and have them all in the same place at the same time.
There's a few things that really stood out to me that you were saying. One thing is procrastivity, right? So people are doing things that come easy to them, that they know they can get success because they can get that dopamine kick. But this other piece is really hard because they don't have the clarity around it.
Yep.
But with your day on Friday that you give yourself, you are getting into this creative flow state where your brain is processing and ready to just dive in. And you might not finish the task, but at least you have more clarity around it.
So let's talk about that for a second, because time is a thing that you need to understand. And if you've got to do something that's particularly creative or executive functioning, there's what I call the booting up process. And think of your working memories like a computer. When you turn your computer on and it boots up, it's got to load the operating system in, all the applications and stuff. And we have faster computers, that's happening now, but years ago, I used to have this Windows 7. It would take 5 minutes for the thing to boot up. And so I'd wake up in the morning, turn it on, go get a cup of coffee, come back. And imagine I start to work and the electricity goes off. I have to push the button and boot up again, and electricity goes off. And I tell this story often, a lot of stuff is that of where I had to reboot my computer over like twice, and 20 minutes have gone by and I've only written 3 sentences. And the reason I like to describe this is if you've got to do something that requires a lot of executive functioning, it's the loading of all the information in your mind before you begin to work with. Like construction people will show up at a site, they get their sawhorses out, their extension cords, their saws, all that's the booting up process before you actually do the work. And that booting up process is very effortful for people with ADHD. A lot of people will say, oh my God, once I'm in the flow, I'm okay, but I'm having a hard time getting into the flow. That's what I'm talking about. Or I'm having a hard time with transitions. This is what I'm talking about. So sometimes people will have this thing that's important and they haven't allocated the time, or they've not really addressed how they can boot their mind up quicker, and there's all kinds of different ways of doing that. But that goes back to, I'm just bringing, that's an element of executive function from working memory into that process that you have to allow time for. And if you're really good, you actually have thought about how you can boot your mind up a little bit quicker so that you can do that important task. And one of the reasons I do this stuff on Friday is a lot of times I need time to boot up, and a lot of it's trial and error, and I have no idea how long it's going to take. And if I have to stop in the middle of the thinking process and I haven't solved the problem and come back, I literally have to start all over again. And so people with ADHD often won't start things because they don't have enough time. They haven't thought through it, but it's that effortfulness of getting their head into the flow, or they get into the flow and they're late for things. It's the alarms are going off left and right. And the issue really is they're ignoring that stuff because they don't want to start over again. It's a legitimate reason to ignore it, because if I stop now, I'm gonna have to come back and start all over again.
Sure.
Make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, that anxiety of having to stop and start, and once you're in that flow state. And I love Stephen Kotler for that. He talks about how to get into your flow state. He has a quiz online for free. And you're right, there's so many different ways to get in there, and everyone's different. So some people have to work out, they're hard chargers. Other people just need to sit in silence. And yeah, I just love what you're saying about, for you, it's giving yourself that time on a Friday.
Yep.
And for other people, when they try to do it Monday through Thursday, when there's packed activities, they may run out of time, B, fear that they're going to have to stop and start again, and C, maybe they're exhausted. They don't have the energy to reboot.
Yeah. So just to go back to, I'm a big person about, let's talk about what's the root cause of what's going on, right? So this Task Darwin is, the root cause is you assigned importance and you scheduled a time, but you didn't make sure all the other elements are there. If you're not doing that piece of it and you're not getting it done, or you're starting over with, fear comes into play, because fear is an executive function because that's an emotion. And it's founded because if you're not clear on what to do and you haven't done it, and that's happened a lot, fear is a natural byproduct because I'm reacting to it because I don't think I'm going to get done. Well, you're right, you haven't got done. But the issue really is not to just say I'm fearful. If you can acknowledge I didn't really know what to do, we can go back and solve that problem and get past it. Because as long as you're not acknowledging you need clarity on it and you don't have those elements there, you're always going to be fearful because you're not setting yourself up for success. So it kind of loops around and explains itself, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. And what would you say to people who say, well, fear drives me, and because I need to get it done and there's that urgency, I get it done?
So a few things. Number one is I've had people that use fear and adrenaline. It's exhausting to live your life deadline to deadline to deadline to deadline to deadline. Literally, it's exhausting. It leads to burnout. But if you also notice, we're getting a little off topic, but I have found that if you want to understand your system, study what you do at deadline, because by definition, you go to the most efficient process. And so I'll tell you a short story. I'm coaching a guy who mergers and acquisitions. I'm working with him in the office. He's just, I mean, there's just like take a number. And I mean, people are praying through his office all day and he's got, you know, impaired working memory. He doesn't realize it, but he talks out loud all the time, but he doesn't notice it because these people are in front of him. And he owns it. I'm a verbal processor. We talk about how he goes home. He doesn't get any work done because there's nobody to talk to. One day he comes to me and he's like, hey man, how was the last week? Oh my God, there was this huge project. If it wasn't for the deadline, I would have never got it done. I said, bull BS. Like, what did you do? Well, I grabbed everybody and brought it into a conference room. And I said, yeah, you probably did 95, 96% of the talking. Well, I'm the leader. I'm like, yeah, right. You're talking out loud. And I'm talking to him about this and I'm arguing with him and he goes, well, okay. He admits he's talking out loud. But Jeff, I can't do that every time I have a project. I said, what do you mean you can't do it? You're doing it every time. You've been doing your entire life. And the point really is he realized that he used the deadline to justify bringing everybody into the room. My point really is he was thinking it was the deadline, but for something like that, it's to justify bringing everybody, because I do a lot of study. If you want to know what your system is, your cognitive process, whatever it is at deadline, you're going to regress to the most efficient because it's the most efficient. So that people get emotional with regard to that. But if you go back and you study your behavior there, it's there. Now, as an aside, I can kill myself for this because we came up with this thing called the PFC. For us, it was the prefrontal cortex meeting, right? Because that's really what it was. He had some professional blah, 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 blah that he used. So nobody knew what it was, but it was the PFC meeting. And he began to do it a couple of days out. So I didn't mean to get too sidetracked from Task Darwinism, but that's how emotions begin to play. And often we're not actually dealing with what the root cause of it is or witnessing what our own processes are. Because instinctively, when you're at deadline, if you do it, you're going to go to the most efficient means for yourself. Make sense?
Huge. I love that.
Yes, 100%. And I want to cover one little small thing. As a college student, once more, after watching your video, Jeff, on Attention Talk Radio on YouTube about Task Darwinism, you bring up cost-benefit analysis. And I think it's super important with prioritization. I think, see, as a college student, say I have a 2-hour class, more specifically a lab, because labs are usually 2 hours, 3 hours long. They're really long. And they usually sometimes end early. Sometimes they go overtime if the lab's real long, if we're a little bit backed up. And I am running on my schedule based off that lab will be 2 exact hours. Now, say the lab ends early at an hour and a half. And I have homework that's due 2 weeks later, and I have an exam that's due 2 days later. I'm putting off that homework for the future, but the exam's higher priority. But since that half an hour, I have an extra half an hour because it did finish an hour and a half early, I would usually do my homework during that half an hour because I already had in my mind scheduled that I already would be taken up for that 2 hours. And that's a relief right there. And I think it's the cost benefit analysis that you bring up. I think those moments right there are super important to analyze and see, okay, I can use my time wisely right now. Get rid of those little small unfinished tasks to give me extra clarity to take on the larger difficult tasks.
So the story that I tell in that, we're going to go back to the beginning. Remember, I said you have to have all those elements in place. So I think the story that I was telling on that, and I got so many videos I forget, but I think I tell the story. Imagine you've got this really important task and you've got to go somewhere to go do it. And you drive out of your driveway and you're going right. Normally you go left, but you're going right. And you're going right. And all of a sudden you look over, there's a post office. Mother's Day is like 2 weeks away and you just happen to have a card, but you don't have a stamp. So there's the post office and it's open. You find yourself pulling into the post office because you got the card, you know the address of your mother, and you can get the stamp and it's all there. So you take this little detour. It takes you 5 minutes to go do this. The point really is you're at a conducive location, you've got the time, the available resources, and you have some clarity, so you execute that task. But that's number 40 on your list, right? So you end up moving forward, like, why am I doing the 40th item on my list? Well, because the cost of it was 5 minutes. Now, if I didn't do it at that point in time, because remember, I always go out the left way out of my driveway. So if I don't do it then, down the road, I've got to drive to the post office, which is 10 minutes out of the way, 5 minutes to get the stamp, and then 10 minutes back. That's a 25-minute investment. So what I find myself doing is I'm digging in there because I'm saving myself 20 minutes. People with ADHD, they'll shame themselves because you're supposed to do the important parts first. But if you look at your literal behavior, a lot of times you're doing what you're doing because everything's come together. All those elements are in place at one time. So you do item number 40, not the most important item. And so that relates back to what I was talking about. So I kind of, it's a different concept, but it kind of goes back into that, but it all dovetails into that, which reminds me, I did an interview years ago with Dr. Russell Barkley on working memory. And we talked about the concept of a GPS. You put in the destination, that's the goal, and it gives you the plan. But imagine you're going somewhere and you jump in your car and the gas light's on. Oh my God, that's new information. Now I have to reroute the route to a gas station, right? And then I get back on the road, then there's an accident. I got a detour, I got to go around that. And then I'm driving down the road, I look up and I see a billboard with a champagne bottle. Oh my God, a celebration. I'm going to a birthday party. I got to get a card. Now you reroute yourself. So in life, particularly when you have ADHD and you're always getting new information, you're rerouting yourself based off of new information. So prioritization and getting things is a really dynamic process, but nobody ever acknowledges it's a dynamic process. They just say, if it's the most important thing, why shouldn't you be doing it? What I hope is that the people who are listening to this can begin to watch your behavior and understand the legitimate reasons why you're doing what you're doing, number one, but also bring more consciousness and saying, okay, if I need to do number one, I need to bring these elements together and make it happen. Again, going back to problem solving, right? You're thinking your way through the dynamics, not just saying this is important and asking yourself why I'm not doing this and shaming yourself.
Right. So you're saying that Brian Tracy eating the frog doesn't work for everyone. We need to get all the pieces in place first. And sometimes they're more convenient. And you do math problems in your head because you realize that you can save an hour by doing something else right away. Which
if you understand Dr. Barkley's model and understand executive function, it begins to explain so much. So like there's a video on the internet where there's a woman who goes into a room to get something. Because of working memory, recalling that you need to do something, retrieving existing knowledge is difficult. But if you see something, there's a cue. So they walk into the room and they see something that's unfinished. Oh my God, I need to get that done. So they get in on that task. Then they find something that's unfinished. This is actually a working memory issue, okay? Because they're not able to hold that in their mind. And it's kind of funny watching the meandering of the task. But the core issue is a working memory challenge by the retrieval of existing knowledge. It goes to that outside. So you have cues that you see that remind you, and you end up going from thing to thing to thing to thing. And so that's where self-awareness is real important when you come back and you understand kind of what's going on. And I tell people, like, sometimes I just spend a day to go into my house and walk around to see all the stuff that I haven't finished. So I can just I don't plan anything that day, but I just dedicate time to it. Yeah. So I didn't mean to get off on too much of a tangent, but it was just a piece you can begin to explain the behavior off the cognitive side of it.
Well, when you have 3 ADHDers and a lot of information, we can get off topic. That's okay.
100%.
But I think that kind of also goes back to what you were saying before about making sure that you're in the right environment, you have the right conditions. So if I'm trying to do something that maybe is in my kitchen and my kitchen is messy and I haven't been attending to it in a while, that might not be the best place to do it. Or even my office, maybe it's a little chaotic where it shouldn't be. Then perhaps I need to go to another area like a coffee shop where, there might be some distractions, but there's nothing for me to do there. So.
I was coaching a guy one time, and he was complaining because he wasn't getting important things done. He was out and about all the time. And I came to realize as he's managing his world with his emails with a cell phone. Now, remember the elements. You got to be in a conducive location with the right amount of time, the resources, and the right tool. At the end of the day, a cell phone is not the right tool.
All the
It was funny because I'm like, you're a businessman, you're making a couple $100,000 a year, buy the freaking laptop. He had the right tool. All of a sudden he was able to do what was important because he had the right tool in the right location. He had never thought about that before because he was like, this is important. Why am I doing it? Well, you got to have what you need to. That's the thinking part that people with ADHD, they skip over it. That's what we're emphasizing is you got to stop and you got to okay, these are the 5 elements. How am I going to bring them together all at the same time?
We hope you liked today's video. If you want more information about ADHD, please feel free to visit our website at differentbrains.org or my website, coachingwithbrooke.com.
And if you enjoyed today's video, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and subscribe.